Hello and welcome to the St. Andrews Society of Los Angeles podcast. Each episode will bring you the latest news from the St. Andrews Society of Los Angeles, as well as fascinating interviews with entertainment personalities, government leaders, and community advocates. St. Andrews Society of Los Angeles, where Scotland meets the City of Angels. Let's get started. Andy Scott is a world-renowned sculptor who creates contemporary fabrication techniques in his work. He might be best known for his creation entitled The Kelpies, located in the city of Falkirk, which stands higher than 100 feet. Andy continues to create unique and awe-inspiring pieces spanning the globe for both private collectors and the public sector with works like Under the Tartan Sky, Aria, The Minotaur, and many other one-of-a-kind works of art. Please welcome Andy Scott. Our guest host today is Dr. Richard McKenzie, who is a Canadian-born Scot and who received his medical degree and training from McGill University in Montreal. He is presently Professor Emeritus in Medicine at USC's Keck School of Medicine and serves as a Vice President of the St. Andrews Society of Los Angeles.
Andy, thanks for joining us today for this podcast. It's really a pleasure to talk to somebody who, is straight from Scotland and knows their way around Scotland, both in terms of its culture and its activities. I could say I know a little bit about the Scottish culture, but, I don't know that much. And so as a physician, I've always been fascinated by the origins of creativity and when in the life cycle it happens. In my experience, this usually happens during the adolescent years, the young adult years. What was the time of your discovery?
Then for sure, definitely when I was young, but I would probably suggest maybe even younger than that. I think if my mother was tuning into this, she would tell you about how she used to stand on Legos continually when I was a little kid and probably was cursing me at that point. I have to say, though, joking aside, I think my mother and father were both tremendously supportive when I was a wee fellow. I remember always drawing pictures and all the time drawing and painting when I was little. And, that became a real thing. I guess I showed some talent or some ability at an early age. And they suggested I would go to lunchtime classes at Glasgow School of Art. I think maybe I would have been about 12 or something then. And that really fired my imagination. And from then on, as you say, when I was into my adolescent years is really when I started to think, this is really what I want to do. My father was a draftsman in the building industry, the building trade. And from him, I guess I picked up a real love of architecture and I began to notice, if you've ever been to Glasgow, you'll probably have seen all the Victorian statuary and the beautiful detailing on those old Victorian buildings.
Yeah.
I always remember my father telling me to look up at the buildings and seeing all those statues and sculptures really triggered my imagination. And that's when I began to think about sculpture as an art form in my teenage years. And I guess, luckily for the architecture world, I was no good at counting in mathematics or anything like that. So the art world got me instead of architecture. So there you go. So teenage years is when it really came together.
That was very insightful of your parents because, the brain is going through such a rapid period of development and so vulnerable to that which it's exposed to.
Yeah.
And it's often said it's our thoughts that create our creativity.
Yeah.
It's our brain's ability to bring those thoughts together and to materialize them in some action. And so certainly it was your parents who nourished this in you.
Yeah, I was very lucky. They were, I understand, we don't have kids, but I understand many parents' concerns for the youngsters would be that they would, in inverted commas, get a real job, like do one of the more formal, traditional subject matters, or these days, a lot of sciences, technologies. But it was very, I think my parents had a great insight to see that, or to hope that I would have a degree of talent and persistence to be able to make a living out of art, because it's not a traditional way to make a living. So, all credit and thanks to mum and dad for doing that back in the day. It definitely was a key part of my youth, I have to also credit great teachers when I was a youngster too, both at high school, and I was lucky enough to be selected for a special art course that Glasgow's education department used to run in a big old castle in Scotland called Castle Toward. And I was lucky enough to attend there, and that really gave me the confidence and focus that I would be able to do this, you know.
But as a sculptor, you chose a somewhat unique medium for your expression, steel and bronze.
Yeah.
Many of your works are quite massive in
Yeah.
size. What inspired you to create things so large and in such a difficult media?
I don't know whether it's so much inspiration or the fact that my fingers just don't work in tiny little details. You know, I don't really know which way around it goes, to be honest. One project grows out of the other, and working the way I do is a very organic. It's not a linear career path by any manner of means, and you respond to the briefs and the challenges that come your way from clients or from projects, and if a project demands something that's got to be 25 feet high, then you pretty damn quickly learn how to do the project 25 feet high. So I wish I could say that it was a straightforward, you know, ABC type.
Yeah.
But it really didn't happen that way. The steel work evolved out of making armatures, little steel skeletons inside clay sculptures.
Mm-hmm.
Those little steel skeletons became increasingly elaborate. And then friends back in the day, kind of hinted not so subtly that maybe I should concentrate on the steel work, and, you know, take that away from the clay. And eventually I developed that as a kind of art form on its own, and really took it to the nth degree, so to speak. And it's become a really distinctive way of doing things. The bronze work, perhaps you could say, is more traditional. That is based on clay modeling and then casting. So there's definitely more of a traditional lineage of sculpture making in that. But the steel is, or the way I use the steel, is quite unusual, and it's just grown organically. I don't have a good answer for that one, I'm afraid. It just
But you must be a man of patience and planning to build these things, first of all, in miniature, and then to enlarge them into actuality.
Not really patience. No, I don't see it that way. People often think that when they look at my work, but to be honest, I'm usually so involved. It's so much part of my thought process that I don't really think about it that way. You know, I'm just on the tools and I do it. I've got my music on. I just work hard, and things just evolve. You know, I don't really think about the time it takes. I have my music on. My brain is focused on what I'm trying to achieve. So I don't really consider it patience. You know, I look at other artists and think, my God, how do you have the patience for that? And they reciprocate. But you said an interesting thing there about starting off small and enlarging. That's not really the way it works. Only on the very biggest ones do I do a small scale study. I prefer to get straight into the material and the scale. And I really don't have any need personally to make miniatures or to do even drawings. I much prefer just to go straight in and build the thing and work at it full scale, you know, unless of course it's 45 feet or whatever, you know, tall. That does take a bit more of a technical process. But I tend to just dive straight in there.
So did you work directly with the Kelpies?
Kelpies were slightly different. The Kelpies, that scale of project demanded an entirely different approach, and we were very lucky to work with the engineers and fabrication companies on that one. That was a whole different kettle of fish. That I made 2 sets of 10 feet high versions, which were then enlarged to become 100 feet high. So that was a very different process indeed.
Okay, so you mentioned that you normally just put on some music and get to work. So the first question I always have to ask as a music buff, what are you listening to? I usually start the day with something kind of laid back, like something classical, bit of jazz, maybe something just to get me going. And then by the end of the day, it's chaos. Who knows what's coming next? You know, it could be, depending on my mood, it could be anything from, I don't know, it could be some good old fashioned rock and roll. It could be some soul music, just whatever takes my mood. But I don't like to work in silence, you know. I start to hear the voices, you know. Right. So I know that you mentioned earlier that Glasgow School of Art had kind of like a lunch program that you were going to as a kid. Is that what made you choose Glasgow School of Art to be where you actually ended up studying?
Yeah, I guess so. I was, again, part of that whole Glasgow heritage that I mentioned before. The art school, which is sadly no longer there, as you might know, there was two terrible fires over the last few years that have more or less brought it to be demolished. More or less, it's gone. But back then, the art school really was the flagship of Glasgow's creative energy, and the city itself was under fantastic transformation when I was growing up there in the late 60s, early 70s. The art school was the focus of all that. My father being involved in what he was doing, I was very aware of Charles Rennie Mackintosh, the architect behind it all. And to go to that building as a youngster and to be immersed in that history of fantastic art and creativity really was mind-blowing for me at that young age. So it certainly was one of the driving factors. But I guess the other thing, it's changed days now. Back then in the late 70s and early 80s, it wasn't so usual for kids to travel far from home. For not in Britain anyway. You kind of, most kids stayed where they were in their hometown.
Yeah,
it wasn't so regular to travel away down to London or something at that age. So it was by good fortune and coincidence as much as anything else. But I was also lucky to have had that experience. I guess, who knows what might have happened if I'd gone somewhere else at an early age. But, there's no point in unwinding history. I stayed where I was, and it was a fantastic time. I benefited hugely from my years there. I don't know how much they actually academically taught me, but I had a fantastic time. And I was lucky to be there at a time where figurative painting and sculpture was really on the ascendancy, and it really suited my own personal development as an artist and the subject matter that I was interested in. And I'm pleased to say I'm still in touch with both my fellow students, former students, and teaching staff from those days, and it was a great influence on my life.
Since your time in Glasgow, you've traveled quite widely now with
I guess. Yeah.
The attraction of your work and your opportunity to do different work around the countries. I know the Kelpies is always associated with you, but do you have some other favorites that you would like to?
It's hard to pin down, to be honest with you, Richard. I had a studio in Australia for a while, a few years ago, and that was a fantastic experience. I met some great people, did some interesting. I think in the end I did about 15 projects over there. Some were quite modest in scale, some other bigger ones. And I think just the sheer exotic nature of those times and being so far from home and setting up a studio there, they hold quite a special place in my heart and my mind. Just some fantastic kind of surreal experiences working over there. Closer to home, well, former home back in Scotland, I mentioned Charles Rennie Mackintosh, the designer of the Glasgow School of Art. And just 2 or 3 years ago, I was lucky enough to be commissioned to do a memorial statue of him. And
wow.
To actually end up doing a bronze memorial statue in tribute to that great man and everything he did for the city of Glasgow was a very, very profound honour and something I was just delighted to do. It was fantastic. So that one was very special to me. There are other, I did a project up in Aberdeen in the north of Scotland. It sounds a bit bizarre, but there's a giant leopard sitting inside a huge atrium of a hotel development, which is, the leopard is on the coat of arms, the heraldic symbol of the city.
Yeah.
So that was a kind of surreal sculpture, but was very well received up in Aberdeen, and it looks fantastic. That was a special. That one was challenging because the engineering was so difficult to figure out and to do, and we achieved that, and it looks magnificent there. I did one in Belfast, in Northern Ireland, which is about 60 feet high, and at the time that she was commissioned, Belfast and the north of Ireland was going through some very, very radical changes, as you might remember from from the troubles that place had back in the day. And this sculpture was commissioned to sort of symbolise the change and transformation of Belfast, and it was a fantastic experience. I always had such a good time working in that city. Great people. Got very fond of that city and country. So yeah, there's so many that it's difficult to. I'm not giving you a very good answer. They're just popping in randomly here, but it is difficult because every project you become captivated by it, and it becomes your entire focus of your life. It can last as long as maybe 2 years, and it's the only thing you can think about, and then it drifts off. Something else takes over, and it's difficult sometimes. Hanukkah, sometimes, yeah, but remember that such and such giant horse? I'm going, oh yeah, I forgot about that one. It's sometimes a strange experience.
it sounds like what I was saying earlier, that your brain is still actively developing, and these thoughts are coming to your brain and coming together and
Maybe,
consolidating, and you've got all these new ideas happening while you're
yeah.
dealing with the old ideas.
Yeah, maybe Hanukkah would probably tell you that my brain has thoroughly stopped developing, but that's a whole different. Yeah, look, my head is bursting with ideas constantly, but finding an outlet for that is challenging. The way I work is to commission, so I'm usually
Yeah.
employed. I'm hired by people to build a sculpture, either for them personally or for a sporting club or an institution or whatever it might be. So although I have lots of ideas of my own floating about, it's often very difficult to find an outlet for them because I'm client led. I work for
Yeah,
it.
yeah.
So it's an interesting paradox that I find sometimes, that although most of the time I'm employed and I'm lucky enough to work to commission, I don't then build up an inventory or a series of works to have an exhibition the way artists are often thought of working.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
So I've very rarely had any gallery exhibitions, for example. I've always worked to commission and for the public realm mostly.
Yeah.
So it's a kind of different track of the same journey. It's quite an interesting way to work.
Well, in a sense, the world is your gallery. I mean, you would have to travel around to see your works.
Kind of, yeah. That's you could look at it that way. Yeah, some of the pieces, especially recently, I've been lucky enough to be commissioned by private clients, and that's an interesting experience because it really is for them. It's on their private property, their land, they own it. Is their joy, if you like, and that's a different set of criteria to work to. Often it's much simpler, I'll be honest, because it's just a direct appointment. You shake hands, you build it, and it's
yeah. It's
increasingly these days when you're working for, especially for cities, for councils and regional areas, the paperwork and bureaucracy is sometimes just like, it really is mind-boggling and can often put you off the project. I'm sure you've had experience of working with big administrations.
Bureaucracies are not creative, not creative at all.
They tend not to be, and that can sometimes be quite stifling. And we have made the decision in the past to actually walk away from some projects because it's just not what I'm here for. It's anyway, that's a whole different story.
Now that you're in LA, do you have any ideas coming to your mind as to how to build a project here, or ideas?
It's an interesting place. I think I would love to do some work here, of course. I mean, it's such a vast place that it's crying out for them, especially, as you might know, back in the UK, I was lucky enough to do a few beside major highways. And as you're stuck on the 5 or the 101 or something like that.
Yeah, absolutely.
You can certainly see the need for something to break the monotony and enriching the experience. The challenge is finding the people to pay for it. And having just arrived in Los Angeles, I think we need to find our way through the city and through the way that the city operates and find the networks to make things happen. And I think there's definitely an art in that. I don't know if I'm personally that skilled in that art, but that's part of the challenge. I'm aware that Los Angeles has the Olympics coming up, and it's one of the cities hosting the World Cup for soccer. So you've got to think there's going to be some opportunities in the city for that kind of activity and some sculptural landmark statements. But it's how you get yourself in front of the decision makers that's the big challenge,
You mentioned something about working with a city versus working with people and in doing kind of personal projects. Do you find, and the ease of kind of switching between doing something with a person where it's just, hey, this is what I'm idea, this is my idea, this is the contract, moving on. How does that work with their personalities and kind of their kind of whole idea and then the vision that you maybe have for what should be happening?
Well, that's a good question, and I need to choose my words carefully because I don't know who's going to be watching. I don't know who's going to be watching this. That can be quite challenging. Sometimes you can present a client with some fairly progressive and quite radical ideas, and they just don't buy it at all. I've literally had clients say, "Look, son, I just want one of your lovely big horses. Stop mucking about and build me a horse." It's like, okay, then that's absolutely fine. Other times I'm pleased to say we have had more scope with private clients who've really been willing to take a little bit of a leap of faith and have me do one particular project ended up in a private collection in Mexico and was a big Minotaur, which was a very powerful piece in the end. And that particular client really had the vision to commission some fairly exciting work. So that was a real thrill. But yeah, quite a few of these conversations can end rather abruptly, you know.
Yeah.
You're like, well, sure, okay, I'll build what you want me to build you, you know.
Right.
But wouldn't it be fun to introduce the mythology of the Kelpie to Los Angeles, where it's the area of creativity in the world, a Hollywood kind of thing?
Yeah, the Kelpies are, one of the reasons the Kelpies are a peculiar beast. They've been a fantastic gift for me in many ways. They've brought me a great deal of recognition, and I'm pleased to say awards and honorary doctorates and all sorts of wonderful experiences. And we could talk all day just about that project. But in another way, strange as it sounds, I often feel as though I want to leave them behind a little bit. And that I'd rather investigate other avenues, maybe a mythological or equine subjects, but let the Kelpies sit and breathe for a while and let them be their own creatures. And one of the reasons we left Scotland was, how do I put this? They cast a long shadow, both metaphorically and physically. And I felt that it was time to get away from them and find myself a little bit and have new adventures and new projects. And I don't mean that to sound in any way negative about my experience with the Kelpies, because it was a phenomenal thing to be responsible for and to be such a part of. But over here, I think I would probably rather continue down an equine or a mythological and narrative storytelling avenue with my art, but leave the Kelpies themselves where they are in Scotland. And the other thing, to be honest with you, I signed a contract. Part of my contract with a client group over there in Scotland kind of restricts me from doing the same thing over, like they're supposed to be dialogues for where they are. And obviously I have to respect that to a certain extent. And it's an interesting thing to be part of. And look, without them, I wouldn't be chatting to you guys today.
That's right.
So we have,
they're part of your mythology now. Yeah.
It's a strange thing, it's a strange thing, as you can probably tell. I'm struggling for words a little bit. It's a strange thing to have in your portfolio of such huge scale. It's like, it leaves you with that thing. You often hear about people talking to musicians about, how you're going to follow that. What's the next album? How do you follow that? It's like
exactly,
It's like the Joshua tree was for you too. It's like, well, what's your next thing? I'm like, I don't know. It's like, and the irony is that actually, financially, they weren't such a good project for us. I wouldn't go into that subject here, but they weren't what people think they were. But let me just put it that way. And that oftentimes it's the smaller projects which are financially considerably more rewarding and psychologically much easier to deal with. The bigger a project and the number of contractors who are involved and all the officialdom that becomes part of it, it becomes increasingly onerous and time consuming. And although the end result is very worthwhile, sometimes you question if the process is actually worth it. It was a very, very demanding project. I don't mean that sounding any way. I'm glad we did it. But actually, as part of your career, you have to temper those big ones with more modest, more practical, more expedient ways of making a living and working as an artist. So it's an interesting thing to have in your portfolio and in your range of experiences, I should say.
But was it these adventures of your mind that brought you to Philadelphia, that brought you to the U.S.?
The whole Philadelphia thing came about because we'd had some fantastic experiences visiting America, and we had a lovely exhibition in New York City through Glasgow Caledonian University, and we'd had one very nice commission for a private client up in New York. And we really felt there was a tremendous opportunity here. So we applied for green cards and we got them relatively quickly. I was really surprised how quickly we got. I'm officially an alien of extraordinary ability. So that's, as my wife would tell you, she always knew there was something wrong with me, so I'm officially an alien. So we got the green cards, and we were originally we're trying to make our minds up between Chicago and New York, because we have some great friends in Chicago, still do, love that city. And then we met by a series of coincidences, a fellow who's a great friend still, who enticed us to go down to Philly for a look. And when we got there, we realized how much more affordable it was than New York City for studio space, for the standard of living, the cost of renting a house to start with. it was just so much more manageable. And most importantly, it was only an hour and a half away from New York City. So in some ways, it's closer to get to Manhattan than some parts of Brooklyn, you know. It was, or certainly than upstate New York, you know. So there was a whole series of logical decision-making processes that made us settle for Philly. We had 5 years there. We had a fantastic time, worked in a fantastic studio with some great guys, no regrets at all. But we got to a point where it was time to broaden our horizons and move on. And again, we'd had some great experiences over here on the West Coast. And I'll be honest, those East Coast winters get a bit tiresome. So,
yeah, they do. Yeah.
So here we are, newly arrived in Los Angeles, and who knows what's coming next. It's it's an unusual career path, as I said earlier, and it's the same thing extends to our geographical positioning. But Philly was good. We really enjoyed it.
So now you've become part of the Scottish diaspora, which is really influencing the world and always has influenced the world.
Yeah.
With the number of Scots, and I'm of Scottish descent myself, the number of Scots around, do you feel there's more the diaspora could be doing to support the cultures of Scotland? Because I've always found Scotland very inventive, and the Scottish very inventive and creative.
Yeah, they are a creative bunch, that's for sure. But you know, the Scots are a peculiar bunch. You know,
yes.
I mean,
I'll buy into that too. Yeah,
you'll never meet a prouder Scotsman than me or you, I'm sure. You know, You know, it really tugs at the heartstrings, and anyway, all that kind of stuff. We'll talk about that another time. But you also find that Scots tend, unlike, for example, our Irish cousins, you know, who have a tremendous togetherness, and the whole Irish thing is huge. You know, the Scots seem to downplay it and let it slip a little bit, and they all drift apart. And
you're absolutely right. Yeah,
it's a strange thing, you know. It really is.
Yeah.
As for what we could do, you know, certainly, I mean, for example, you could commission Scottish artists. So there you go.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
But no, joking aside, you know, I don't really know a straight answer to that, because there's such great like I'm part of the Global Scots organisation you might have heard of, which is set up by the Scottish government, and I'm one of them, and it's a networking organisation set up to nurture and mentor and make connections. I am part of that. I have benefited once with an inquiry which was going to be in Vietnam through the Global Scot Net. Project didn't happen, but the fellow was very, very helpful. I think for me, unfortunately, though, that the creative industries often aren't credited by government or by the wider sort of business community for the influence and role that they have. They tend to play a secondary role to the tech business and tourism and golf and whiskey and all the usual Scottish stuff.
Yeah.
And yet the creatives are really the for me anyway, are the imagination and the drive behind it all, you know. And it frustrates me a little bit, I have to say, that there's not more focus and more money. Not that anybody's looking for handouts, but more money isn't given to promoting them and pushing them, you know. I sometimes feel we're a little bit disadvantaged and behind sectors like finance and all the rest of it. And, you know, fair play to them, they do a fantastic job. But, you know, another guy in a suit telling me about banking or about golf is just like, yeah, whatever, you know. It's and I shouldn't be so disparaging, because obviously they're tremendous contributors to Scotland's well-being and all. But I know from personal experience, there are tens of thousands of fantastically talented artists and designers in Scotland who aren't getting the same crack of the whip or the same attention in the media and the same focus, and who absolutely deserve it, because each of those individuals or small companies added together contribute hugely to Scotland's financial well-being, and more importantly, arguably more important, to its global soft power, its clout, you know. It's
right, yeah.
And that I find a little bit frustrating, and that I wish perhaps the powers that be would give more push to those kind of things. But it is what it is, you know. It's
the more that we network and discover, you know, our own thirst for things Scottish and things culturally Celtic, is the more that we will support each other in what we're doing.
But that's you're absolutely hit the nail on the head there. But the other thing about us Scots is that we're a bit backwards about being forwards.
Yeah, that's right.
And it's true. It's a national trait, and I absolutely believe that we, you know, one thing I've learned since coming here to America is like, my goodness, God bless them, but the Americans really, you know what they're like, you know, they are not shy, and I mean this with no disrespect.
That's right. No, you're
But
exactly
they're not
right.
shy, you know. They will tell you how good they are and what they've done, and whereas us Scots, you know, it used to. I'm going to tell you a little anecdote if you bear with me. My friend, the first chap who took us down to Philadelphia, we met. I said I was a sculptor. He didn't think much more of it. And then eventually, after spending a day with him, he said, "Can I see your portfolio?" And I opened up the laptop, and there was the Kelpies. And he nearly fell off his table. He's like, "Oh my God." He said, "That's not your opening line." Yeah, you know, and he's like, "Man, if you move here, you need to change. You need to push that more." You know, and I'm like, "Well, it's just not me," you know.
Yeah,
And I think it's a not a failing, but it's a trait of many Scots is that they aren't very forward about their capabilities and talents, you know. And it's sometimes I think it might be our own undoing slightly, you know, and I'm guilty of it too, you know. I don't really push myself very much, and it's just not in my nature, you know. So
no, you're right. You're absolutely right.
you know, it's I don't know. There's no answer to that really. It's
Well, yeah, and the other thing that I found coming from Canada down to the U.S. is that the Americans are not do not fear failure.
no, that's absolutely it's
willing to take risk.
Yeah, absolutely they are. It's fantastic. And you know, one of the things that we've noticed since we've been here, you know, every conversation you have starts with, "Oh wow, fantastic, let's do it bigger." Yeah. You know, which is
so you've got it.
Oh wow, fantastic. You know, whereas in Scotland, you know, much as I love the place, nearly every conversation starts with, "Oh, I'm not sure, you know, I don't know if that's going to happen." And it's such a different way of looking at things. And even though in the end, the projects might not happen,
yeah.
if you have that optimism and boosterism happening all the time, it changes the way you think. It can't help but lift you and buoy you up. And
the Americans seem to not only enjoy the product, but they enjoy the energy of, of getting to the project.
Yeah, it's very much so. Yeah, very much so. Yeah,
and they often learn a lot from the energy, more than what they would have learned from the completion of the project.
Maybe, yeah. I've never thought of that before. That may well be part of it. Yeah, we've had some great experiences here. Yeah. They buy into the whole energy of. You're right. That's a good observation. Yeah. We've had some lovely experiences where, and I have to say, this isn't just restricted to here in America, but in the beginning of a project, the client will be a bit hesitant, understandably nervous. They're spending quite a bit of money on a big horse or whatever it happens to be, and you absolutely can appreciate why they're a little bit hesitant and cautious. Once they see it taking shape in the studio, everything changes, you know. Wow, you know. And then you can't keep them out of the place. You know, they want to come in on a Saturday. And that kind of, the enthusiasm becomes infectious. And then that's when it really takes grip. And that's one of my favorite parts of the job, is when you see people who have started off a little bit cagey, a little bit, you know, sometimes, as I say, you know, like they're worried about the finance, and then when they see it take shape, they're like, "This was the best money we ever spent. This thing's fantastic." With so many tourists, so many, you know, people have come to see the sculpt, whatever it might be, you know, and then it's all vindicated and everything's worked out, you know. But yeah, the process is definitely something to be considered and enjoyed.
And also, I find that Americans like things big. They don't like miniature things. I like big things.
Well, often, yeah, that's often the case until you go to New York City. And then one key lesson somebody taught me was, when you're trying to sell art to New York City, you have to remember everything has to fit inside an elevator for one of those big buildings. You know, so you're not going to get a 25-foot. You're not going to get a 25-foot horse inside that elevator. It ain't going up there. So
that's true.
There's pluses and minuses to that, you know.
But they'll find a way to get it up if they really want it up there.
Well, that's the other side of it. Yeah, there have been some interesting different approaches here in my experiences in the UK, where here there's definitely a more can-do attitude, I think is the best way to describe things.
Yeah.
And as I said earlier on, that really buoys you up and engenders enthusiasm and excitement and makes you want to start the next day afresh, and it's really very, very uplifting. And yes, overall we've had a fantastic time here, and it really does feel at the start of a new chapter, a new adventure here in Los Angeles, and fingers crossed and touch wood that's what's going to happen.
What do you miss most about Scotland?
a good curry in Mother India in Glasgow.
That's true. Yeah.
No, friends and family. Yeah, I definitely miss friends and family. I miss the Scottish sense of humour, which is especially Glasgow has a fantastic sense of humour.
Yes,
Uh,
yes.
some hilarious Glasgow jokes have died a sad, lonely death here in the States.
My uncle was a Glaswegian, and I could understand when I could understand his jokes, they were very funny. But when I
Yeah,
couldn't understand his jokes, I just laughed anyway.
yeah. It's always, yeah. I think there's the sense of humour and the architecture of Glasgow. I have to say, I do
Yeah.
sometimes miss my home city. But we go back fairly regularly. Obviously, the COVID experience changed a lot of things, but we have been lucky enough to go back fairly regularly, and it's never more than a long plane flight back over. So I'm trying to think what else. Despite myself, I still keep an eye on the football scores. Sorry, I should say the soccer scores. When I was there, I would sometimes have my head in my hands at the scale of the thing, the whole sport. And
Yeah.
but now that I'm away, I quite miss it, and not quite miss it, especially my own team. But yeah, no, it's easy enough to keep in touch. And the other thing these days, I'm very conscious of, like we're chatting today, as if we're right beside each other. You can do that with friends and family back home.
Yeah, I know. Isn't it amazing?
Yeah.
But now that you're sort of settled into the American way of life, what do you see for yourself, both personally and professionally?
Oh, that's a good question. Personally, I think you probably won't be surprised to hear me saying I've probably become more patriotic about Scotland.
Yeah, aren't we
nothing,
all? Yeah,
there's nothing like being far from home to remind you how good it is.
absolutely.
Even though at this stage in life, I don't want to live there because I've got so many other things, challenges. I am very conscious of Scotland and the rest of the UK, I have to say, and I've become much more patriotic about it. And much to my wife. My wife is Dutch, and she's just like, "Oh, what now? Another bagpipe? More bagpipes?" Oh, I think that's been perhaps bolstered by my affiliation to the National Trust for Scotland, which I'm working with in some capacities, and that's really made me very much more aware of Scotland's heritage, its architecture and landscape and all that.
Right.
So that's definitely I've noticed that about myself. Professionally, I guess it's just a case of looking onwards. First of all, I need to find a studio and get a studio place to work. That has proven to be quite difficult so far here in Los Angeles. I think it's fair to say we underestimated the scale of the economy here and how different it is certainly from Philadelphia. It's proving to be quite tricky, although we're looking at a space just now, and hopefully that will come together very soon. And then the next challenge, of course, is work. We've got to find jobs. We've got to make ourselves known to the potential art commissioning, sculpture commissioning world here, and make the right connections. We both used the word networking earlier. We need to start networking and getting ourselves out there. It's like starting all over again. At this stage of the career, most artists are probably thinking about hanging up their gloves and their welding helmet and maybe taking it easier, and here we are starting all over again in a new environment. So only time will tell if it was the right thing to do or not. We can only cross our fingers and hope for the best and work hard, and the future will unfold the way we try and make it happen. Who knows?
I want to thank you, Andy. You've been very honest and very straightforward, and you've given us a lot of what your life experience has been just through this short conversation. And and it's you bring that Scottish enthusiasm, and I say that somewhat guardedly because the Scots are not always that enthusiastic about what they're doing. As you say, they tend to diminish themselves.
Well, yeah, I mean, I'm pleased that you say that, and thank you very much for those kind words. I think if you'd spoken to me 7 years ago when I was in my cold, rainy workshop in the north of Glasgow, it might have been a very different character. But maybe
absolutely.
Maybe it's the sunshine and optimism of California. As I say, time will tell. But I do appreciate you saying that. It's very kind of you.
Well, the St. Andrew Society is here to help you along in making friends and networking and meeting people. And
Indeed.
that's what we're all about,
Absolutely. Thank you for that. And I've had such wonderful experiences with the St. Andrew Societies and organizations all across this fantastic country. As I mentioned earlier, I'm very close to the Chicago Scots. In this coming November, I'm going to be the recipient of an award from the New York St. Andrew Society. It's a great honor for that. And of course, as I mentioned earlier, I'm tied to the National Trust for Scotland, and the welcome that I've had from the various Scottish organisations has been fantastic. And again, I'm not glossing over it. I'm sure that is largely down to the Kelpies and the impact they've had, and it's been wonderful to have them as part of my portfolio, and they've enabled me to meet so many wonderful people, and as I say, especially receive those types of accolades and awards. It's really been fantastic. I'd like to think as we move on that maybe at some point I could also offer that welcome or mentoring role to other Scottish artists who might want to have a crack at this bizarre, massive, wonderful, sometimes challenging country that we're all enjoying here.
Yeah. Well, I want to thank you for your time and for your energy and for your thoughts. It's been a pleasure chatting with you today.
Absolutely. It's been an absolute pleasure. Yeah, I've enjoyed it too. And I'm pleased to say my little puppy hasn't been too naughty. So he's done his part too. So
he perhaps found out something about you listening to you talk, so he's been quiet.
Maybe, yeah. I don't know. I actually don't even know where he is. I hope he's all right. No, absolute pleasure. Thanks very much for having me. It was really nice to chat with you, and I look forward to seeing you all in person sometime soon, very soon.
Yes.
Well, you know where I am if anything else comes up. I look forward to chatting again.
Yeah,
Thank you.
that'd be great. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of the St. Andrews Society of Los Angeles podcast. For more information on the St. Andrews Society of Los Angeles, visit www.standrewsla.org. And don't forget to like our Facebook page, Instagram, Twitter, and YouTube channels as well. Have a great week, and we'll see you next episode.